Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining, but the marketing strategist in me knows that at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. This is your Agritourist podcast host, Jen Ross. Did you know that there are about 1.8 million tea growers around the world? The leading tea-producing countries include Argentina, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, and Taiwan. The U.S. trails behind the 6 million tons of global tea production, producing only about 90 to 100 tons a year. And there are about 80 to 90 tea farms spread across 17 states in the U.S., with most of the tea growers located in Hawaii. So let's meet Lori Baker, a farmer and artist. Lori is one of the owners of Heron's Meadow Farm, located in Woodbine, Maryland. Lori and her husband Bob grow tea under the company name BLTeas. Growing tea in Maryland is not an easy feat, mainly due to the cold temperatures. Knowing the statistics around growing teas in the U.S. and growing teas on the East Coast of the U.S., Lori and her husband knew what they were up against, but they took on the challenge anyway. The couple had been contemplating an agricultural venture. Lori, an electrical engineer for 30 years, had sold her company and knew one thing for certain. She wanted to focus on farming for the next chapter of her life. She has always loved growing things and loved watching nature do its miraculous thing. She feels at peace when she's digging in the dirt or planting seeds and just feels a connection with nature. During the winter months, Lori focuses on her art, specifically her pottery. Her teapots and mugs are the perfect complement to her homegrown teas. Lori's story is not an easy one. As you will learn, Lori has survived 2 kidney transplants and now has a renewed energy and focus for her farm. An amazing story and a truly amazing woman. Enjoy my conversation with Lori Baker.
Hi.
Lori.
How are you?
Welcome. Good morning. I wanted to start, you have an interesting story. I read some articles that I found about you and your husband and this journey, which I know has been an interesting journey. And I'm curious to also hear about what's going on now with the weather as it is. But I wanted to just start with a quote. And I believe you said this quote. It says, "I feel at peace when I'm digging in the dirt or planting seeds and feel somehow connected to Mother Nature."
Yes, very much so.
So tell me, just because I have that same type of feeling, there's this calmness and connection that happens when my hands go into the soil. So what is that feeling?
It's hard to explain, and maybe it's the fact that you're focusing on something very primal and, just the dirt has been there forever. And, when you're focusing on tilling and planting and that type of thing, you're not focusing on all the crap that's going on around you,
Yep. And there's a lot of it.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's getting crazier by the day,
So it still feels that way for you, even, do you still have that feeling when your hands are in the soil?
Yeah. And in fact, it was funny. My husband and I, because I'm a potter as well, and had done pottery kind of as a hobby when I was going through my first divorce or my only divorce. And we were sitting and we were watching the Great Pottery Throwdown on TV, which is a show I absolutely love. And it just dawned on me that, like, all of my joys in life and all of the things that I'm like progressing to have to do with dirt or soil, or, because the clay comes from the earth as well. And, that I constantly have to be, touching and, creating something out of that. And, I think subconsciously I knew that, but, to kind of have that in your face, and it's like, well, yeah, it makes sense, so.
Yep. Yep. That's great. So take me back. I'm trying to think of how far back you want to go. I just want to get some context about you and how this kind of evolved to where, where you guys are now and what you're doing in regard to growing teas and also obviously the artwork you do. So I don't know how far you want to go back. You tell me.
Yeah. Well, I'm an engineer by trade and was an engineer for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Started, like co-oping when I was in college and loved that as well. But I eventually formed my own consulting company fundamentally so that I could stay home with my young kids and not have to go into an office and send them off to daycare. And, that kind of independent consulting grew into like a 12, 13 person company. But I knew like towards the end, it was time for me to leave. I was babysitting employees and doing, business activities more than, the engineering that I had loved. So
How old were your kids when you decided to potentially leave?
they were older. My first one was out of college and my youngest was in his senior year. So it was one of those deals where it was like, okay, my last college tuition payment and I'm done. But, I had kind of known
that is a rite of
bit.
passage.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially as a woman who's raising kids.
Yeah, I know that's that landmark of, okay, you guys are done and on your own and I can be me again. Right?
Yes. Or reinvent me.
Right, exactly. It was one of those deals where I had known before that, I kept telling my business partners, I'm going to turn 50 and I'm out, and I would always joke with them, 50 and I'm out, 50 and I'm out. I was 51 when, I made that last college tuition payment. And so I'd sold the business. And it was one of those deals where I was dating my now husband at the time. We knew we wanted to do some kind of agriculture, and find some land. He loves to kind of do like the homesteady type of, environment, and I always loved growing things. So we had found the farm and kind of knew we're going to go into tea. And that's kind of another story. But like I sold my company January 5th of 2015 and then got married January 10th of 2015 and kind of like boom, 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 started my,
Literally.
Yeah.
A whole new life.
Yeah, exactly. So those are kind of wild times, but, and we had already put like our first 50 tea plants in the ground. But that's kind of the way I need to do things. I tend to not transition until I have that next thing lined up. And by that time, I'm ready to go with, what's next for me. So
were you both from Maryland?
I initially grew up in Ohio and then moved to Maryland when I graduated college for work. My husband actually grew up in the Los Angeles area and moved out to Maryland for work as well. And that we actually met when we were both married to our previous partners through work. And then and we had always been, kind of friends, but, and I was friends with his ex-wife and that type of thing. But yeah, once they had separated and had gotten their divorce, we just kind of started hanging out because we would rock climb together and kind of evolved from there into, from a friendship into something more. So
talk to me about the agriculture piece. You said you always like to grow things. What does that mean? Like you had a garden at home, or what was the connection there?
Yeah, I would always like, even when like I had first moved to Maryland and I had my own little apartment, I would always have house plants, everywhere. And I loved having my own little home garden, where I would grow herbs or, put a couple of pepper plants or tomato plants in the ground, and or growing flowers. I love growing flowers as well. And so, yeah, I always just had to have a piece of land where I could put stuff in the ground and, just kind of go from there.
So then there's this leap between that and
yeah, I know.
owning a farm, and then specifically owning the type of farm that is probably extremely challenging, although you're an engineer, so you you probably want to take that type on. So talk to me
Yeah.
about how you guys came like, and collectively, both you, I guess, why teas, and what were the considerations with making that decision? I feel like this is so unique. It obviously
Yeah.
is based on what I've read. So talk to me about that piece.
Yeah. Well, initially I had thought of, because I always knew, like I said, I knew that kind of my next life, I wanted to do something agriculturally. And this was before Bob and I started dating. And I'd always kind of toyed with the idea of doing a vineyard and grapes and that type of thing. I am a tough love person on my plants. I do not pamper them. I do not baby them. If you can go in the ground and survive, then you're my type of plant. And grapes, especially here in Maryland, to do organically, and that was something I really wanted to focus on. It's very, very difficult to do them organically, just because we have the high humidity and all the funguses and bugs and pests and stuff. Plus, I had felt that kind of the boutique winery thing in Maryland was a little bit overdone, and we don't have the soils that produce the fabulous wines. And not to say that Maryland wines aren't good, because they are, but if I was going to do something, I wanted it to stand out, and that's kind of always been my personality. So Bob and I were down in North Carolina at a cafe on vacation, and we were drinking iced tea because we both, loved tea. And he all of a sudden kind of popped up and said, "Why don't we try growing tea?" And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." We can't grow tea in Maryland. So I think the idea intrigued me, and we both did a bunch of research. And we actually we had lived in two different locations at the time because we were still dating. And he bought 5 plants and I bought 5 plants, and we put them in the ground just to see, if we could grow them. And they survived some really, really heavy winters. And so we thought, maybe we've got something here. So we started looking for the farm, and then kind of went from there. Discovered that.
Tell me about that, the farm search too, if in
Yeah.
some part of your story. I just want to know how you came up on this farm and what was it about this farm.
Some of it had to do with economics. There was a certain amount of, this is the amount of money we have, and to meet our goals financially, we didn't want to, spend huge, huge amounts of money. Plus, we didn't know if this was going to take off or not, so we didn't want to overinvest and then have it crash and burn, and, us be left with this huge bill, and, okay, now what are we going to do? Because, I wasn't bringing in an income anymore. Bob still works, full time to pay the bills fundamentally. But when we were searching, we were kind of searching in some various locations, because Bob still had a daughter that was in elementary school at the time. And so we needed to find an area where, again, schools were good, that type of thing, because we had her to consider as well. I lived in Howard County, and we were kind of searching, around the vicinity, and we found a couple of farms up for sale that were just plain land, no buildings, no anything on it. And so we were kind of toying with that. do we find something that already has pre-existing buildings to go off of, or do we start completely fresh, and build as we go? I think the one thing was, we've went and looked at a couple of those and they were very flat. And then we found this farm and it is very rolling hills. It has a stream going through it, a little pond. And in all honesty, it was a mess when we found it, It was just buildings were beyond repair in some instances. Most of the fields had, like rolls of barbed wire and, just overgrown and that kind of thing. But I think we drove down the drive and it was just kind of one of those where, Bob said, it's like, yeah, it just felt like home. And the soil was good, from tea plants need high acidity in the soil. And Western Howard County, where we're at, tends to have higher acidic soil. So we knew that would be good for the plants. And the rolling hills would tend to be good as well, just because planting tea plants, on slopier areas tends to help with drainage. They like water, but they hate wet roots. So those kind of things kind of fell into our considerations. And then the other thing too, the price was right. There was a lot of work to be done.
How many acres was the property?
44.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So it would let us do a lot of different, things and play and that kind of thing.
So he seemed to, it resonated with him. What was obviously, sometimes a property isn't perfect, but did you feel that same way? Did you feel like
it was and it was one of those where I think that both of us are, I know me especially, when I go someplace, I always see the potential in something as opposed to what the reality is. And I think we both kind of, So I think we both kind of, saw the farm more for its potential. We put on those rose-colored glasses, definitely. And I can remember after we bought it, I was still working and Bob had taken a couple of days off, or I was on travel or something like that. And he went to the farm and was kind of like starting to poke around in the barns and buildings and, kind of go through fields where like there was like huge overgrown things. And he like called me, it's like, Lori, he goes, what did we do? But yeah, we just kind of, you bite the elephant one bite at a time. We just kind of would pick an area and clean it up and then pick another area and clean it up and kind of go from there. So
you were both not living at the farm?
No, not at that time.
Okay.
We were living at my house, which was like 3 miles down the road. Oh, so that kind of worked out well.
That's nice.
Yeah. Because what we needed to do, the farmhouse on the farm was very old and could not be rehabbed. So we had to demo the farmhouse and build a new house before we moved to the farm. Okay. So we probably had the farm 4 or 5 years. Is that where you're
calling me from right now? Is this the farmhouse? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. I said those first couple of years were a little more difficult in that we were, I was commuting back and forth, and Bob's daughter was still young. So I would still have to be home, like when she got off the bus and that kind of thing. So my hours here were limited. So it was really nice when we finally got to move to the farm, and it was like, you could walk out the door and do whatever you wanted and that type of thing. You didn't have to plan in advance that, okay, I'm going to spend the next 4 hours. What all do I need? So
what were some of the first things you did? Obviously, there was a lot of clearing and some things you had to prep, but what were some of the first movements on the farm to move it towards this tea adventure that you had in store?
Well, the first thing we did, of course, was to prep the field that we wanted to put tea in and put our first 50 plants in the ground. And then we knew each year that we were just going to add more and more slowly, and again, we were still learning a lot at that time. And we didn't go all in and plant the whole field out because, we didn't want to invest all that money and then have every plant die. So each year we would add a couple more rows. And each year there was another lesson learned. So that was kind of step number one. Step number two is we had, the farm used to be a dairy farm. And so there was an old milk parlor on the farm, and we wanted to convert that into a small farm store and my pottery studio. So we were working on kind of cleaning up around that and trying to figure out how to maybe rehab that building. And there was a hole in one part of the roof. And so Bob was up there, pulling down parts of the roof so we could, fix it. And two of the walls fell down. So we were like, nope, this building's trash. And so we demoed that building and then built a new building on top of that site. And that is now our farm store and my pottery studio.
Nice.
So that was kind of our first big push. And then pulling down an old barn that we weren't going to use and that was falling apart was kind of our second big push. And each year we kind of do, a different big project. 1 year we put up the high tunnel. This year we're building a greenhouse. And, so we still have lots of projects for, years to come.
Yeah, so. I'm sure it always is. So
you don't get bored.
No, definitely not. But that's the intrigue of it too,
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn and experience, and the weather and Mother Nature and how that factors in.
Yeah.
Every season is unique. Take me back to the first set of tea. Like what type of tea? I read a little bit about what you planted. Talk to me about what you did plant, the first set of tea, and why. What types of teas? What are the considerations in Maryland versus other places that, grow tea more regularly?
Right. All tea kind of comes from the same plant, the Camellia sinensis. So whether it's a black tea, a green tea, a white tea, all of those leaves come from the Camellia sinensis plant. And it's just how you process those leaves as to what type of tea you get. That plant tends to be more of a subtropic plant and loves warmer weather and water. Maryland tends to have very, very cold or colder winters. Growing up in Ohio, I know cold winters, and so we had to find a variety of the Camellia sinensis that was more cold hardy. So our first planting was just that. We would get seedlings. There's a nursery down in North Carolina called Camellia Forest Nursery, which I absolutely adore. And that's where we would, take U-Hauls down there and load them up with tea seedlings and bring them back. And they helped us kind of, hone in on a couple different varieties. So we started out with maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 different varieties of the Camellia sinensis to see which one would be the most cold hardy and would withstand our winters. So, that was kind of, the first selection of things. And so I think fundamentally here in Maryland, the biggest thing you have to consider is that the weather is much colder than they tend to, thrive in. Although, tea grows in the mountains of Nepal and that type of thing. So you can acclimate them to colder winters. The other thing for us is those colder winters give us a shorter growing period. So we cannot physically harvest as much tea as like, say, in Sri Lanka or, China or those type of things because of the fact that we may only get 2 or 3 pickings in a season versus 8 to 10 if the growing period is a lot longer. So for us, it's one of those things where we never necessarily wanted to go like big commercial tea farm. For us, it's more about the adventure. It's about teaching people, about tea, teaching people to love tea, and just pretty much the adventure for us, and the experience. Right now we do have approximately 1,200 plants in the ground. After about 3 or 4 years, they tend to take hold. If they survive those first 3 or 4 winters, then they seem to be golden and, can withstand like what we had, this last couple of weeks where we were down into the, sub-zero
Yeah,
wind chill
that's
and
what I was
stuff.
gonna say. We've had some tough weather.
Yeah. And the plants are looking a little, worse for wear at the moment. The leaves have browned up and we'll probably lose most of the, the leaves off the plants this year. But we expect, them to come back and, we just may not be able to harvest as much this year because at first blushes, once spring hits, they're going to put all their energy into completely and totally reliefing as opposed to forcing growth on the plant.
So obviously they're perennial. I didn't even know that.
Yes.
So which is really nice actually.
Yeah.
So you've obviously have figured out, how long has it been? How many years has it been since you started that first or planted that first batch?
It's been 10 years.
God, oh my God. That's amazing.
We were thinking about it the other day and I'm like, this 10 years has flown, and it's hard to believe that, we've been, growing tea in the ground for 10 years. So.
Wow. So from, in the first few years, you obviously figured out varieties that were working better for you.
Yeah.
And what do you continue trying to plant a few rows of focusing on those types of varieties?
Yeah. Yeah. We, narrowed in on, for us, the Sochi variety, where the genetics have come from Sochi, Russia, for some reason seems to thrive better here in Maryland than other varieties. So those are the plants we tend to get and have put in. We've now kind of gotten to the point where our more mature plants are seeding. And so our next kind of big goal is to start harvesting those seeds, which we have the last couple of years, plant those, start seedlings from our plants. And eventually, hopefully, the genetics of those plants that are thriving in our environment will be passed on to, multiple generations, and that we'd eventually come up with some kind of Maryland cultivar, that has, more hardy genetics that survive our winters. So that's kind of what we're playing with now. And, learning to, start the plants from seeds and get them from seed to out in the field has been a little bit of a journey as well. We have no problem growing the seeds. That's a fairly easy thing. But because our winters are harsher, those first year seedlings are too tender to go out in the field. If we would put them out, in fact, this was one of the lessons learned. We had bought 5,000 seeds through a big buy through the U.S. League of Tea Growers. And we started all those seedlings in the old farmhouse. We had converted a couple of the old bedrooms into nurseries, and we'd have tables with all these little seedlings lined up. And then we started them kind of like in February. And by April or May, I was putting all of those, plants out in the ground. We lost all 5,000 in that first winter. So we learned that they cannot go out that first winter. We had the high tunnel by then and thought, well, we'll just winter them over in the high tunnel. It got too cold, because we don't have a heated high tunnel at night. And so we lost that first batch. The next year, what we decided to do was to try to bring them indoors into my pottery studio. And they do not like being indoors. It's too dry. We couldn't keep up the humidity enough. And we lost that batch. Even, trying to tent them, to make, was just, they didn't like it. So the third year, what we decided was we're going to build cold frames within the high tunnel to provide that extra insulation. And that seemed to do the trick. And so last year, we got our first probably 50 50 plants, and they're out in the ground now. I put them out in the spring last year. So this will be their first winter out. So it'll be interesting to see, especially since they've been shocked with a really, really cold winter this year, how many of those, make it through. But I've got another, couple hundred in the high tunnel this year.
And then the greenhouse, you said you're building a greenhouse, right? So that should be very helpful.
What we want to do with the greenhouse is kind of emulate the conditions of the cold frames that we are doing in the high tunnel, and build in kind of pits in the floor and insulate those, so that they have the earth's insulation, and then have panels on top so that we can remove those panels, put the tea plants in the winter down in there with poly panels on top. And then when they go out, we can put the wood plant panels back down, and the floor is solid, and the greenhouse then can be used for starting seeds and that type of thing.
Great.
So
it's exciting. So when will the greenhouse be ready?
It hasn't been, we're just starting to order materials right now. So it'll probably be a good year.
That's okay. It's exciting though. Hey, it's exciting. All right. So talk to me about, what does it mean to harvest a tea plant? I have no clue.
When you're harvesting tea plants for producing tea, what you're doing is you're only picking new growth off the plant. And that new growth is called the flush. So you hear sometimes the term first flush, second flush.
Okay.
That's when the plant, kind of flushes off the new growth, and that's what you're picking. These days, it is harder to pick by hand. A lot of tea plantations and that type of thing use more of a mechanized machine most tea plants tend to be grown like in hedgerows, and pruned such that all the new growth comes off the top. And that makes for easier picking and plucking and that type of thing, and faster. You can just go down the row and pop, 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 pop. And if you're doing a mechanized cutting, it's almost like you're taking a hedge trimmer down the row, and you're just cutting off that new growth. The difference between hand picking versus, mechanized picking, when you're picking the new growth, you tend to want to, they say the premium pick or premium pluck is the top 2 leaves and bud. And so, there are some commercials for I don't know if it's like Tetley tea or some of them, where you'll see like the tea leaf, and that is kind of that perfect pluck is, you see the 2 leaves and you see the little bud coming out. They say the older leaves are very, very bitter and hard to manipulate. So that's kind of the other misnomer, is that you can harvest a whole plant and get a lot of tea. No, it's, you're realistically, even like with a big tea plant, you may get a cup of tea off of it all season long. You save all those leaves and it'll produce 1 cup of tea. So you do need a lot of plants in the ground to give you a larger volume of tea. But that's kind of the process and what you're looking for when you're, harvesting tea. Doing a mechanized cutting of your plant tends to sometimes also give you some of that unwanted growth, because you're not being discerning when you're cutting per se. And so you're getting some of the older leaves in. So they say that mechanized tea quality tends to be less than a hand-plucked tea quality. But I know there are a lot of places that can post-sort, a little bit. And if you're getting just, a few of the older leaves in, a huge volume of new leaves, that it tends to kind of wash out too. So.
Okay. So you do the harvest, and then what happens?
Once you harvest, your clock kind of starts. And depending on what type of tea you're going to process, those leaves into, kind of determines a little bit what your process is going to be. And for instance, your white tea is the purest, least processed tea with the leaves. Fundamentally, you pick the leaves, and then we hang them in mesh, kind of like mesh herb drying bags. and you let them dry for like 72 hours. And then we do a final dry in the oven with some heat to kind of kill the, any bacteria remaining. And that is white tea, just pure, wow, simple, unprocessed. Green tea, what you're doing is you're picking the leaves, you're putting them in the mesh bags, and you're withering them for, 18 to 24 hours. And then what you have to do is do what is called a kill green process. What you want to do with green tea is stop oxidation, because it's the oxidation that turns the leaves brown, and fundamentally gives you a black tea, kind of like an apple or an avocado. The longer you let it sit out in the air, the darker it gets. Yep. So with green tea, you do some sort of a mild heating process up to like 155, 156 degrees to stop oxidation. And different cultures kind of do different things. The Japanese tend to do use steam and steam the leaves to stop oxidation. In China, they tend to do a pan fire where they have big woks over heat and then just kind of gently, roast the leaves in the pan. And these processes take like, 3 or 4 minutes. They're not like you don't want to cook the leaves, so you've got to be very careful about that. We do a process. We learned that we vacuum seal them and do sous vide. Where you immerse it in water, with an immersion heater. And what that tends to do for our leaves is it gives it a more floral flavor as opposed to a grassier flavor, and which is our preference. I mean, I don't like the real grassier green teas. I like more of a floral flavor to it. So then once you do that and you've stopped oxidation, you roll the leaves. And we roll our green leaves by hand because we tend to we have a small tea roller, but you need at least 5-6 pounds of leaves, in there to provide enough pressure to roll. Sometimes when we're harvesting, we don't get that much. So we hand roll, our green leaves, and then you put them in an oven to dry. And then with black tea, you kind of start that same process, but you don't do the kill green process. And what you're doing is you're rolling, letting it oxidize. You're rolling, you're letting it oxidize. You're rolling, and so it's wow, a more intensive process. And you kind of continue to do that till you get kind of the flavor and the feel that you like. So,
out of the 3, which have been the more popular among people?
Right now, I would say our Black Raven, which is our black leaves. We just rolled out our white tea this year. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, next year, who comes back and is requesting, because we have several people, I know that there's always people, let us know when Black Raven comes out, because, we're coming in and stocking up. And that's the other thing too, when we're harvesting, we're not getting huge volumes of our Maryland leaves. So fundamentally, if you want our, farm grown leaves, you need to come like from June to, usually we're out by October, maybe November, depending. So in the meantime, though, we do import leaves, and that is one of the things that I'm very open about, is that not all the tea we sell through the store and online is our farm grown leaves. We're just not there yet. Yeah. In order to kind of keep, some income going, we do need to import leaves, but we hand blend, hand flavor everything. A lot of the ingredients that we can grow, we do grow to put in the leaves, like sunflower petals and, cone flowers and, echinacea, those type of things. Mint, of course, we have our huge mint patch that we use and that type of thing. So
when you say we, do you have, like, is it you and your husband? Who's doing this? Who's the we?
Yeah, we is fundamentally me.
Me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
we collectively.
But I do like to include, Bob, because, when he can, he is involved, probably 95% of the farm work, is me, because he does, work full time. What he can do during the weekends, he does. And I will admit he is the one that will roll the green tea because he has a great rolling method, and he's stronger too. It's
Hey,
sometimes it
whatever
takes,
works.
yeah. But we kind of, all have, both have our own little, yes, I'm the one that's out in the fields and tending the plants and, usually harvesting and then processing and drying and blending and packaging and all of those things. He's more our, the maintenance man, and we do have bees on the farm as well. And so he is our hive master and tends the bees and that type of thing.
I read about that. That's great. I mean, hey, that's a lot of work in itself. I mean, I know the bees do most of the work, but still there's work there.
Yeah, no, there is. And, just trying to tend them and, make sure that they're happy and healthy and, so.
So I want to just clarify, it's even for me, what is an herbal tea when we use these terms?
Right.
I just want to, be clear about, you're talking about, I won't pronounce the tea that you're growing and it produces the white, black, and green, depending on how you process it. Then what's the difference between what we see in the marketplace as herbal teas?
Right. Herbal teas, to a purist, are not a true tea.
Okay.
When you say the word tea, typically you're referring to what is processed off the Camellia sinensis leaf. Your black, your oolong, your green, your white. Herbals are always kind of put in the category of a tisane. So sometimes you'll hear that word. To a purist, that's kind of how they lump, anything else that doesn't come off the Camellia sinensis is a tisane or an herbal tea. And usually, just kind of as a side note, the Camellia sinensis is a naturally caffeinated plant. So that's why all those teas, a true tea has caffeine in it. And herbals, you're taking leaves from herbs or plants, other than the Camellia sinensis, and coming up with a blend that you brew. To me, to most Americans, tea is anytime you put leaves into a water and brew it, and that's perfectly fine. I don't kind of judge that whole purist tisane versus tea versus
No, it's just interesting.
But
you don't know. A lot of people don't. They just don't know that. They don't understand really the biology, the agriculture behind some of these things. So it's interesting to learn that,
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of similar to, if you talk about like scotches and bourbons, or a Bordeaux or, that type of thing. There are certain grapes, certain processes that classify them, as a bourbon or as a Bordeaux or as, whatever else you want to come up with. And I think it's the same with tea. Tea is truly classified as tea if you process the leaves from this plant, so.
Excellent. So you have people come to the farm and do some programs with them?
Yeah, we've got a small farm store, so people can kind of come and buy tea. My pottery's there, and like I also do some crocheting, and that's in there. Just some crafty, artsy things, and then also to kind of bring people out to the farm. We do certain events. People can come do a little pottery workshop and learn how to do some slab building and kind of play in the clay. We do tea blending workshops where you can come, we usually have like a theme, like this February, it's chocolate teas, for Valentine's Day. So you come sample a few different chocolate teas, and then we move into kind of my studio and it's set up and you select kind of a tea base, whether you want a black tea or green tea or an herbal. And then you get to put all kinds of ingredients in and blend and mix your own tea. And we kind of talk about, flavor profiles and how to do that. So we do those kind of events. In the summer, we do some yoga or a sound bath. And then we have, tea and like a small brunch kind of thing after that. A lot of it is our farm is, to us like our little slice of heaven and is beautiful. And we want to share that with people and give them a small space where even if it's for a half hour and you take your, little pot of tea on the patio and just relax and take in nature and, watch the foxes run across the field and, that type of thing. It just, there's more of that needed today to, kind of reset and regenerate and, renew your spirit and your soul. So,
Yep. Talk to me about the name of your farm and how that came about. And then your tea name is different. So just talk to me about that just so people know.
We have an identity crisis, and a lot of that was because of.
I like that.
Yeah, I know. It is confusing, and a lot of that was because of like the steps we took as we were, my pottery studio is known as Mud Pie Studios, and I had that and that name way before we were thinking about a farm and that type of thing, because I was doing craft shows and that kind of with my pottery. When we knew we wanted to do tea, and we had bought the farm, or it was right before we had bought the farm, we had come up with the company name of BLTeas and organized that as an LLC.
Bob Lori.
Yeah, Bob Lori Teas, I know. Or sandwich, whichever. That's my husband's doing. He is definitely the punster of the two of us. So we established that and, and was kind of organized and doing taxes and everything under that name. Then we had the farm and went, and it took us a year or two before we came up with the name. But we came up with the name Heron's Meadow because we do have a lot of herons frequenting the pond, and it's really close. We've got some gorgeous little meadows and stuff there as well. So that's kind of how the name came about. But then, yes, we ended up then with 3 names for the same thing in reality. And so how do you reconcile that for people? So we've gotten to the point where when we're talking about the tea company, it's BLTeas at Heron's Meadow Farm or Mud Pie Studios at Heron's Meadow Farm. Because in reality, to go back and reorganize the business and, under a Heron's Meadow Farm name, we would have to go through all and make that an LLC. There's a lot of background business stuff.
Oh, trust me, I know.
yeah,
But no, I think it's great. No, it works,
Yeah, we confused people in the beginning, but I think everyone's now understanding that,
Hey, but if they're asking questions, that's a good thing.
It is.
That means you pulled them in somehow and they're curious. Yeah. So, 2 things. One, you have an interesting, and I've been focused on this a lot, that bridge between agriculture and art, or art mm-hmm. and ag. What are your thoughts on that connection? Like when people talk, you obviously are doing that, right. And maybe not even totally on purpose, but what are your thoughts on how agriculture and art work together?
That's a really good question that I hadn't really thought of in the past. I know if you're talking purely economical, the pottery and the farming blend very well together in that, like this time of year, I cannot get out, and do a whole lot on the farm because it's just too cold and there's nothing growing and that type of thing. But this type of year I can create, I can be down in my pottery studio and make my teapots and make my mugs and that kind of thing. And then once it starts getting warmer, you switch gears and, so from an economical standpoint and a financial standpoint, they blend really well together. I don't know, I think kind of like as an artist, there's there's that part of your brain, I think, that you trigger that I know for me releases endorphins, or, you feel, I don't know, you just feel at peace and whole, and it's just hard to explain. An artist understands, I think, what I'm talking about. And for me, it's that same thing, when you're on the farm, to a certain degree. And I don't know if like big corporate commercial farmers feel the same or not, if that's kind of a different environment. But to me, it's that whole connection with something and creating, when we're on the farm, when you plant something in the ground, you're creating a life of some sort.
Yes, you're creating life. Yeah.
Yeah. And, like with pottery or, if I dabble in watercolors, or, I'm like playing with stained glass and playing with different medias, you're creating something that of beauty, and maybe that's it. Maybe that connection is, creating beauty of some sort, whether it is, a living plant or, a teapot, it's maybe that's the connection.
That's beautifully said. I agree 100%. If you don't want to talk about this, that's fine, but I know you've had some health challenges along your journey. I don't know if you want to talk about that and how that's impacted your outlook and even what you're doing today, and how you've made some shifts in your life to be doing things that are really feeding your soul.
Right. No, I have absolutely no problem talking about it. In fact, hopefully, it brings awareness to, I am a kidney transplant patient, and I had my first transplant. This is my second. I had my first transplant when I was 35.
Did you have your kids by then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had developed kind of an autoimmune disease called FSGS.
Okay.
The big long name for that abbreviation is hard to pronounce. So, but what it is that, your body kind of attacks and scars your kidney. They think that that my pregnancies triggered it. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
so they discovered it during my second pregnancy. I was spilling protein in my urine. They thought it might have just been the pregnancy that was causing it. I tested again once I gave birth to my youngest, and I was still spilling protein. So they went through, did the biopsy, discovered, what I had. And 6 years later, I went in for my first transplant. So my kids in reality didn't know me healthy, for the first 6-8 years of their life. My brother was my donor the first time. He was a perfect match. And my first kidney lasted 25 years.
Wow.
And then shut down overnight. And so 2024, it shut down the week before Thanksgiving, 2023.
What
I had
happened?
to go on diet. Yeah, it was 2023 was a rough holiday season. I was in the hospital at Thanksgiving, and then got out shortly after, was on dialysis, then caught COVID at the dialysis center for Christmas. And, but then, I was on dialysis for most of 2024. We found out my husband was a match for my second kidney,
crazy.
Which is like amazing in and of itself.
What are the stats on that? Wasn't it
like 1 in 100,000 kind of thing? I think that, it was just crazy. So bless his heart, he was my donor, in November. So I had my transplant November 18th. We are both doing fabulous.
That's
I am feeling so much more myself, than you don't realize how bad you feel until you come through it. And, so the farm in reality was like that saving grace of, you focus on the things you love, and you put out of your mind, you can't feel sorry for yourself, and you live each day and you plug through and you do what you got to do, but it was kind of then trying to balance that thing, because I was, doing dialysis, and that takes up a huge chunk of time, and you don't realize how much, time you lose, to do the things you need to do. But yeah, now I'm like making up for lost time, and I've got the energy, and I'm like, go, 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 go. You know? So,
That's
but
great. I mean, I'm glad everything worked out, and it is amazing that your husband was
yeah,
a match. Like, I
yeah, it
just
was. And, you know, and I want to get like a little plug in for, living donors. It's that, um, reality. He was sore for a couple of weeks. From a health standpoint, it doesn't necessarily affect him, you know, at all. Like he's living a perfectly normal life, but he saved a life, doing that. And, anyone out there who is hesitant, it's just research it. I understand it's a scary thing, joy in the what you give to somebody is beyond just words.
yeah, giving life.
Yeah.
So just before we end, so tell me the outlook on this coming season. Obviously, you're putting up a greenhouse in the
Hmm.
next year.
Yeah.
Like, what else is on the agenda for you, as far as the farm goes and your artwork goes? Like,
Yeah.
what are you looking forward to?
This year, what I want, and I just kind of came up with this is, I mean, I love making teapots, and I kind of
Oh,
gotten,
that makes a lot of sense.
I know. And it was that weird thing of had
I
always
love that.
loved, that was my favorite thing to make, even before way before we thought of, so it's kind of that, weird thing of, sometimes life just kind of guides you where you need to go, if you let it.
That's the key, if we let it.
Yeah, if we let, yeah, if
Yeah.
so many times there's just so many outside influences that push you away from, or negative thoughts in your head of I can't do that. And I see that, sometimes with my sons, it's that self-defeating voice in your head. I love making teapots, so I've decided that um, each month I want to produce a new kind of themed teapot for the month. And so that's kind of my, just to kind of get back and jumpstart some of the creative juices again and that type of thing. And then we also have a lot of flower beds in the high tunnel. And I want to try to get to a like cut your own flowers and that type of thing.
Nice.
Or grow some extra flowers to sell, to florists and that type of thing. I don't want to be a huge flower farm, but we want to come up with some other things that will bring people to the farm or create some extra income, now that we've kind of got the tea thing down, and are continuing to expand that. But, what else can we do, to boost the farm's income and help make a little bit of money? Farming is not a get rich, quick scheme. So
No,
you do it
no.
because you love it.
And there are not many things that are get rich quick schemes. They're presented that way, but they're not.
That is true. People are searching for those, but
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. If they would spend more time doing some things and not searching for those quick fixes. Just one other question. Are the kids involved at all? I mean, obviously they're
um,
grown and they have careers and
they have their
lives.
own lives, and the fact, none of them were really truly interested at first, and my boys were in their late 20s, when we bought the farm, and had just kind of gotten out of college and were starting their own lives and their own
Right.
work. So they were like, yeah, mom, you go do your own thing. We don't want to do that. My stepdaughter was in elementary school when we bought the farm, and we have found she has absolutely no desire to dig in the dirt, and that is just not her thing. My older son, especially like this last year, he tends to be artistic like me as well, and he's like gotten into leather crafting and has produced some gorgeous wallets and purses and stuff like that
Wow.
that we actually have in the store as well. Because of the fact that my energy levels were limited in 2024 due to kidney failure, he helped me out a lot. He had lost his job. He got laid off in April of 2024, and so was free to help throughout the season, which was huge. And I think since then he has kind of he of the three of them, I can see taking over the farm at some point. He's not quite there. And I think a lot of it is because, he knows financially doesn't, it can't support him. We can't afford, huge amounts of labor and help on the farm.
Well, he might come up with some ideas. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you are very inspiring. Your
Well,
story. You should definitely write a book one day.
Oh. It's funny, I had always thought about that, but then I'm like, when do I have time to do it?
Well, it just takes a little bit each day,
That's true. That's true.
You don't have to do it all in one sitting. And I think you
Yeah.
have a lot to talk about. It's definitely an interesting journey, and you've done a lot, and I applaud you for that.
Well, thank
Taking
you.
on the tea piece and learning about teas in a part of the country that is a part of the world that's not easy to grow something like that. So
Yeah.
you just taught me a lot about teas that I didn't know. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time. You're doing amazing things. So thank you so much for everything you do. It's appreciated, and let's get your message out there. And I'm excited to see how everything evolves.
No, well, I appreciate, you talking to me and inviting me on, and, this was fun.
I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
One of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution, because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline, that phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing, just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.